So we're going to move promptly to the next panel on tackling grand challenges through open government. There's a correction from the program. This will be moderated by Susan Crawford, who I will invite to get the panel started.
Okay. All right, everybody. This is an exciting moment. If the mic is on, there it goes. Okay, so I served as President Obama's Special Assistant for Technology, Innovation, and Science Policy at the beginning of the administration, and I now have, thank you, I now have it as my mission in life to train people in government to understand the power of openness. And I'm delighted and very pleased to be here today, and I'm going to be inviting a lot of you to the Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, which we hope to make a center for the study of what you're up to. A wonderful thing about the Open Government Partnership is that it sheds a lot of light on individual reformers across the globe who are doing fascinating things and have tremendous passion about what they're up to. So the next series of talks is self-consciously modeled on the TED series. Each one of our presenters will have between 7 and 10 minutes to talk to you from the heart, from their own passion about what they've been working on. And we hope to, and I know these talks will, inspire you and also perhaps inject a little spirit of competition in all of this. Who's doing better out there? And it was, I don't know if you heard, but during the lunch break, Frank Sinatra's famous ballad, "I Did It My Way," was playing loudly. And this is part of that story, these 4 people we're going to bring up. So I'm going to spend a very little time on introductions. They come up, then we do a little conversation among the 4 of them, and then, as Esther did this morning, our hope is to engender a lively conversation among all of you. So a lot of the action in open government happens not at the federal level, but at the state level. And in Brazil, the state of Minas Gerais is taking the lead in a variety of ways. And in the city of Belo Horizonte, they started participatory budgeting in 1993. And they have a relatively new governor who's going to be pushing ahead on a lot of open data initiatives in Minas Gerais. And we're very fortunate today to have the Secretary of Development from the city, Marcelo de Lima Falheber Campos, who's going to talk to us about his most exciting dreams for the future. So Marcelo, if you could come up, let's begin. Great.
Am I going to speak
Stand right there. Or you can talk here, wherever you want.
Okay.
Wherever you want.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd like to, first of all, say thank you to Google, Julia McCarty, and all the people that made this event possible. We citizens of Belo Horizonte, the 3rd most important city of Brazil, are very grateful for having been invited to this important meeting by the Open Government Partnership Organization. We are proud for having been recognized by Minister George Hagi as an example of civic participation, transparency, and accountability in our country. Before telling you a little bit of our experience, I'd like to point out some principles or beliefs that support what we have been doing in Belo Horizonte. In the first place, we believe that participatory democracy cannot replace representative democracy. It can rather enhance it and make it more effective, especially by continuously demanding for more and more transparency and also for fighting against an eventual incestuous relationship between the legislative, executive, and judiciary branches. Secondly, we must notice that we can only talk about transparency and civic participation at the current level because of 4 things. First one, the spread of democracy across the globe. Secondly, the increasing number of people that are being educated in all levels everywhere in the world. Thirdly, the spread and evolution of technology. and communication systems in our planet. And finally, the instability of the world and in the way we live due to so many changes coming up every day. I'm not going to tell you anything new on technology within the Google office, and I'm not going to talk about the fast change the world is experiencing to such a well-informed and connected audience. However, I would like to raise one thing that puzzles me. The more educated people get, the more involved in civic participation they get, but the less involved in electoral politics or representative democracy they get. Look to the turnout levels in the developed world. It seems that although educated people cares a lot about democracy, they do not believe in the power of their vote anymore. In my opinion, this is a sign that our representative democracy needs to be deeply reformed. So rather than teach, the developed world should be open to learn from new democracies that are spreading all over the world, such as the Brazilian democracy. 25 years ago, we could not vote for president. Where's the... I forgot to move on things. Okay, yes. So 25 years ago, we could not vote for president. It was a hard process to defend and restore democracy. Many people had to kill and die. Nonetheless, more than 25 years ago, our city, Belo Horizonte, initiated its story towards more transparency, accountability, and civic participation. In 1984, we launched our first popular councils, one on the environment and the other on cultural heritage. Now we have 24 popular councils making executive decisions on day-to-day issues of the city, such as licensing and urban development. On average, 6% of the council members comes from our civil society. The other 40% are people. Oh God. The other 40% are people either from the executive branch or from the legislative branch of the city. Regarding civic participation, it is also important to point out the establishment of the participatory budgeting in the city by 1994. It works in a very simple way. In each one of our 9 regions, people can present a proposal for the municipal government to develop and implement a specific project. Each proposal needs to get at least 200 supporters so it can be voted and selected in an open meeting with the community in which each person has one vote. Of course, we help them to estimate the cost of their proposals. On average, each region has $4 million to spend on their projects annually. Also, on average, 20 to 30 projects are selected by each region. In these 15 years or so, we have already spent $720 million in almost 4,000 civil works proposed by the community. This is an example of what was before and after. In 2006, we launched the digital participatory budget. Last year, 20% of the amount reserved for the participatory budget process went to Digital One, and participation has been increasing year after year. In 2010, it was 40,000 people. We still have some problems in the voting system of the digital participatory budget, but we are working on a solution to avoid multiple and sequential vote. Finally, on civic participation, we have launched a new initiative this year, the Sherrod Regional Planning, through which we seek and engage new leaders of the city to set up targets and develop public policies for their regions. It's actually an evolution of the participatory budget process. In the Sherrod Regional Planning, we go beyond civil work proposals. In terms of accountability, we made a tremendous effort in the beginning of the administration to set up a 4-year strategic plan for the city with clear targets and strategic projects through which we seek to achieve these targets. Each strategic project has very clear work plans and budgets. They are all available in our website and are rigorously followed through a green, yellow and red management system also available to the public. Finally, we strongly believe that the best way to improve transparency is actually by digital inclusion. We have just received a prize from the Wireless Mundo magazine as the most digitally inclusive city in Brazil. We will keep investing on it. We want that every person in Belo Horizonte has high-speed internet access. This is a kind of a trailer that are spread all over the city to allow poor people to have broadband access. So we do expect that the world turns up into a big agora in the future, such as the Greek had in Athens some few thousand years ago, but now without any kind of prejudice regarding gender, religion, or social class. With this big agora setting the agenda and demanding more and more transparency, Rousseau and Montesquieu dream of an efficient and legitimate democracy could become a reality.
Terrific. Thank you, Marcelo. It's wonderful. So a lot of focus on the city, and our next speaker is also very involved in addressing the largest migration of people into cities that the world has ever seen. And this is happening in India. And Swati Ramanathan has been working with citizens to get them engaged in the planning of their neighborhoods first, and then their cities. So we look forward to hearing from her. So Swati, can you come up? Thanks very much.
And thank you, to the organizers for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure networking with so many of you. I've met such brilliant people who are doing such interesting things. I think it's been really well worth the journey from India. I was really wondering whether I should even be coming here, and I think I got the answer today. So thank you again. I'm especially pleased that I follow you, and I'll tell you why. It's because when we went back to India, my husband and I, we started an organization called Janagraha, Center for Citizenship and Democracy. We began with a campaign for participatory planning, participatory budgeting specifically, based on an inspiration that we received when we were living in London on the Porto Alegre model of participatory budgeting. We thought that the idea of citizens, 50,000 of them collecting in a stadium and presenting to their governments that here is where we think the money and the priorities of the cities are, was just extraordinary. And we thought, this is the holy grail. This is the silver bullet for participation, for accountability of our governments. So that was, I think, about 10 years ago. And we thought we were in for just one campaign and things would just change. But of course, that was not to be. And we began our own journey of understanding citizenship, democracy, federalism, all of these things. We came from the private sector and it just changed our lives. Since then, we started, as I said, this organization called Janagraha. It began with the issue of saying that government must be transparent and accountable. We began with this campaign where we got extraordinary participation, and it blew the myth that most people have that urban citizens are apathetic and really don't care. In Bangalore, we found exactly the opposite. We started with, a very corporate sort of idea. We said we are selling participation as we would sell soap, like levers would sell soap. So we said a call, we put out ads and everything. We said a call for participation. If you care about, your road, and if you care about this, and if you dream of a better city, well, dreams are made by fools. fools, and we had like 4 icons of the city in the newspapers, and said if each one of these one believed that he could win the World Cup in the cricket series, another that he could build the best heart hospital. So all these were icons, and he said, well, if dreams are, to be honest, dreams are made by fools, and if you're a fool, call us, and we would run off our feet. All of our friends said, oh, these people have come from America and returned from there with all these crazy ideas. I don't know what they're in for. Nobody's going to even agree to participation. But that journey, actually, we had thousands of people calling to say, I'm a fool. Tell me what I have to do. And that laid to rest the idea of the apathetic urban Indian and the middle-class Indian. So we began with that participation, but very, very soon we realized the issue of data was a real problematic thing. Even if we wanted governments to be transparent, well, even with the best of officers on the other side, he couldn't be transparent simply because he didn't have the data to be transparent. And that was a big problem. And that began the journey for us of saying that it's not just about stoking the demand side of participation, it is also about systemic reform on the supply side of government. And since then, we've been working both with government and with citizens. Our mission is pretty ambitious. It is to transform the quality of life in urban India. And by quality of life, we've defined it as transforming the quality of citizenship and transforming the quality of infrastructure and services. And this is through taking a systems approach to doing deep governance reforms in our cities. And so we work with both the federal government, the state government, and then also the third tier, the local governments. And we bring citizens and government together. Our approach is very problem solving. It's not ideological. So we, in fact, it's been a huge testament to the credibility that we have with every party. So we work with any party. You have one party which is at the union level and the federal level, and another at the state, and we still work with them. So that's part of the thing, and we do a lot of reforms. Today I want to very briefly, and I know I'm running out of time, so I take 2 more minutes, but some of you have already been, have approached our table on the initiative that we ran, because this is the environment that it is, and we are talking about the power of open in government and technology. I want to talk about I Paid a Bribe. We are this year launching 3 such initiatives, one all on participation, all on accountability and transparency. So I'm going to touch upon this one. I Paid a Bribe is an initiative that we started very, very, not very ambitiously at all. We said, 20,000 if we get in a year, we'll be very delighted if we actually get so many hits. And we started on Independence Day last August 15th, and we had 750,000 hits on our site so far. We've had about 17,000 people writing stories of reporting bribes. We're not talking about bribes which are, the big bribes. You're not talking about the powerful politics and the special interests and the kind of corruption that goes on at those levels. I'm talking about the kind of corruption that in India we as citizens face at every interaction with government, whether it is to do with getting a driver's license or getting your passport or your visa or getting a birth certificate for your admission, for your child to go to school, or a death certificate because you have an insurance claims, or a business license, a trade license. So in every one of these engagements with government, we are always confronted with corruption. We call that retail corruption as versus the wholesale corruption of the big corruption. And this retail corruption is what I Paid a Bribe attempts to tackle. And we've had so far about 17,000 people reporting in 3 ways. One is I paid a bribe. The second is I didn't pay a bribe, which is I was asked for a bribe, but I didn't pay it. And the third is I didn't have to pay a bribe. I was confronted, oh my goodness, by a government official who was honest. So this allows us to also celebrate the good guys in the system. And then we have a fourth where somebody comes in and says, I don't want to pay a bribe and I don't know what to do. I'm not sure what is the process, the documents that I need. Am I within my rights? Are they asking me for a bribe? Should I be paying? So what I Paid a Bribe has done is actually, in effect, first of all, created the data. None of us knew we all know that there's huge amounts of corruption, but none of us knew the scale and the size of it in each of these, geographic locations, the cities by department. We didn't have any of this analysis. So it's become today the single largest repository of, anonymous reporting of bribes in the country. And that's great because it's also acted as a network. Citizens, I mean, people who are corrupt tend to form networks very easily and look out for each other. But those who are not corrupt are like little islands of isolation. And I think what has happened with I Pay to Bribe is for the first time, it's almost like a therapeutic confessional to say, you know, I paid a bribe and I feel terrible about it and this is what I paid, you know, and actually you also can get the market price of corruption. So you know, am I overpaying here? Wait a second, you know, my neighbor only paid this much. So it's actually, you get to see how much each person, what's the price, that's the going rate for this service within government and within the city. So the first thing is data. The second is the networks, as I said. And I think this has been great because not only do you actually put out your queries, you put out your questions, you put out your experiences, and others learn from it. And you know, people are sympathetic, they respond, lots of people write. We ourselves give answers. If somebody says, I don't want to pay a bribe, what do? We give answers. We tell them, this is the process, this is what you should do. And then finally, it's also about transparency. It's what Justice Brandes was saying almost a decade ago, right? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. So it was something like that. I think what happens in India and in countries which are like this is that the reward is very high and the risk is really low. And that's the problem. So corruption thrives and flourishes when A, you have a monopolistic government providing you services, you have very little accountability, and you have no transparency at all. And I think these are the perfect ingredients for this kind of a situation to ferment and grow and, you know, become a monster. So I Pay to Bribe is really not about targeting the individuals. It's actually about targeting the system. So that brings me to the final thing that I Pay to Bribe does. What it allows is to actually, for us at the back end, at the institutional level, to look at the data and to analyze the gaps in the processes within these departments. And then say, these are the problems with the system. How do you plug them? If there are 15 points, touch points, human contact with the citizen, can these be compressed? Can technology play a role? Can things be automated? And we've already found, you know, since we started, we had a call from the transport commissioner in Bangalore city, and he said, I knew it. And I said, what did you know? He said, I knew we had so much corruption in our department. Well, mine's the worst. And here, I feel terrible. You know, I have so many people who have reported on your website. Can you tell me about it? I said, oh, excuse me, are you asking me to disclose the name of the people who have reported? He said, no. Can you help us fix it? And that was great, because he was able to go back to his team and say, you know what, look at this is the proof. So that was it. And so he came back and we worked with him. We looked at the process flows and the entire citizen engagement with the department and looked to see how we can actually help close the loopholes. So that was one of them. We've also had since then, in Karnataka, where Bangalore is a southern state, we've had the chief secretary who said, can we do this for land registration? And can we do this for power, electricity? So, I mean, look at the kind of virtuous cycle that gets going for those who are the good guys within government. It empowers them and it creates the kind of goodwill and the ability to do this. We've also had the chief minister of another southern state called Kerala, who's just called us last week and said, I want to really tackle corruption. Can you help us, given that you've done this I Pay to Bribe website? So there's all these other things that come up which actually allows us to do what Janagraha cares about, which is systemic reform. Quick statistics, we've had about 750,000 hits so far. We've had responses and reports from 243 cities. We've had about 17,500 reports, actual reports. We've had 14 countries. We've been visited by I think 142 countries, and 14 countries have asked us to please start one in their countries. So we've said, you know what, we can't start because we care about corruption in India, but here's what we can do. We can make everything available to you and you can take I Pay to Bribe. So we are working out some kind of an MOU by which this kind of thing can actually spread to other countries. So that's a quick general sense of what we do. Thank you.
That's wonderful. So Luke Ciaffi asked this question at the end of the last panel we had. He said, how do we make the public and other governments care about these issues? And you see the power of personal narrative, that the arc of a story draws us all in. We can't take our eyes away. And we're about to hear another one of those stories. So Mexico has one of the strongest laws on freedom or access to information, rather new legal structure. That's because there were decades of opacity, lots of problems of not getting access to any information. But even though the legal structure is there, there's a lot of inertia, a lot of resistance. And this is where Miguel Pulido and Fundar come in. And so we're delighted to welcome Miguel to the stage to talk to us about his organization and his passion for fixing inequalities through access to data. Thanks.
Let me start with a family confession. Sometimes, when my nephew Santiago is under pressure or when he wants something really bad, he lies. He is just a 7-year-old child, and of course, my brother and my sister-in-law do not let him to do it. Some other times, Santiago creates a fantasy world where he scores more goals than any soccer star, runs faster than a horse, and has shoes that make him jump longer than the rest of his friends. With a lot of patience, my brother deals with Santiago's fantasies, sometimes asking the right questions, but every so often just telling him roughly that what he is saying, it is not true. Now let me make a public confession. When they are under pressure or they want something really bad, this is what governments and politicians do. I'm not suggesting that politicians are like children, even though sometimes they behave like ones. My point is that public servants are submitted to a lot of pressure. Everyone needs or wants something from their government, but in a lot of cases, the government is not able to deliver. The technology is failing now. Now is the iPod. It's a borrowed iPod. It's from Jorge Soto. Do you have a remote there? I solved the problem. My point is that public servants are submitted to a lot of pressure, and everyone needs or wants something from their government, but in a lot of cases, the government is not able to deliver. So, government distort the information and pretend they are doing things that they are not really doing. Additionally, we need to take into account the interests and dynamics of the insiders. What I mean is we are facing corruption acts, conflict of interest, or unnecessary expenditures. In these cases, governments try to hide the information. Believe me, I consider a good talker, but I used to speak in extenso and in Spanish, so this is new for me. This is about the human behavior and the realistic consequences for the people. Everybody in this room knows that the structural problems in public spending are shared mainly to the poor. So that's why we use the transparency and the right to access to information, because we use as a tool to achieve improvements in public administrations. Let me go directly to an important issue in Mexico. As you may know, Mexico is a country with a strong tradition in the agricultural field. It is not important in an economical way, but a sociocultural one. 22% of the economically active population lives in rural areas, and 44% of the rural population lives in poverty. In 1993, just months before the North America Free Trade Agreement entered into force, the Mexican government created Procampo, a subsidy program for the poorest producers designed to compensate the impact of economical integration. During 15 years, the public version about Procampo was that more than 2 million poor peasants were direct beneficiaries of a millionary budget. In addition to that, the government sustained that the commitment with the rural sector was clearly shown in a non-return tendency to increase the budget. The last year, the special budgetary program for the rural sector had an allocation for $24 billion. In this scenario, in alliance with a national network called ANEC, the Environmental Working Group, and a research project led by Jonathan Fox, Fundar developed an online database to reveal who really was receiving the public farm subsidies, how much, where, and why. After 80 access to information requests, some appeals before the oversight administrative body, we got the information. We put together a lot of documents, electronic files, and 600 million of Excel cells in a usable format and accessible framework. 3 years later, the website has more than 3 million visits. Two main topics are part of the public discussion now: the concentration level and the conflict of interest. For example, current data shows that the top 10% of farmers capture 57% of the total payments provided by the two main programs in Mexico. During the past 15 years, 80% of the poorest farmers received only 27% of Procampo total farm subsidies. After the release of that information, the Mexican public now wonders if the program is really designed to provide support to small farmers. It will be very pretentious to say that the change we are living now are direct consequence of this website. But what we do know is that after the information was made public in April of 2009, important policy reforms were approved to fight the degree of concentration in Procampo. And the Ministry of Agriculture promised to invest over than $40 million in order to verify and update the program's recipient list. In respect of the conflict of interest, in 2010, the Superior Audit Institution found that 577 public officials from the Ministry of Agriculture had received Procampo subsidies and request these officials to return the funds that were wrongfully allocated to them. Last year, Mexican newspaper published that the Ministry of Agriculture and other officials returned the money in a historic event in Mexican public administration. It is fair to recognize all these are small changes in the face of huge problems, but change at the end of the day. But the most important thing is that these changes were made after an informed discussion fueled by public information. Another example. Fundar is part of the Regional Alliance for Freedom of Expression and Information. This is a platform where we share experience and knowledge with organizations that face similar public problems. One of them is the abuse of the expenditure in public announcement, in a model in which the government promotes itself as a commercial product. Again, in alliance, but this time with Article 19 and the Justice Initiative, using the access to information and budget analysis and taking advantage of the collective knowledge of the Regional Alliance, we developed a new database that shows the consequence of the way the government is prioritizing the public expenditure. For example, with the money the government expended in the last years in official advertising, Mexico could have built almost 2,000 new public schools, or 18 general hospitals for second-level attention, which is important considering we only have 12, 6 federal and 6 regional. Or with that money, we could have allocated 800 times more money to prevention and citizen participation in the Federal Ministry of Security. As you know, we are facing a lot of problems in security in Mexico. It is fair to say that the Mexican federal government is disclosed a lot of information about social communication expenditure. But this is very different at the subnational level because most of the local governments are hiding this type of information. The last example I want to share is about an excellent experience we have by working with a private enterprise, CityBox. Jorge Soto and Oscar Salazar, both of them are here. By specializing, collecting data, and creating reports for public decisions. With them, we developed a website in order to translate all the Mexican Congress information to the common citizen. The web platform allows users to follow the legislative work, send messages to the Congress members, and participate with comments in a public debate. Considering that just less than 30% of the Mexican population believe Congress is really necessary, probably that's why, and more than 60% think it is the most corrupt branch of the government, it came as a surprise for us when we received more than 500 unique visitors a day. It is too early to extract conclusions of this experience, but in one way or another, what we already know is that there are people looking for information about their Congress. I want to end with a personal confession. Sometimes, I encourage my nephew's fantasies, and I have asked him to lie after a chocolate out of hours. But what can I do? It is his father's responsibility to provide him with difficult reality. I'm just his uncle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as you know, all of the members of the Open Government Partnership who are about to make their official launch in the next hour or so are issuing their national plans, and they've developed consultation documents. Well, in the UK consultation document, it says we have the ambition to be the most transparent government in the world. And one of the authors of this transformation in UK open data is with us today, Nigel Shadbolt, who is a professor of computer science at Southampton University. He's rumored to be a terrific sailor, and he has his finger in many pots around government. So it's wonderful to hear his personal story about this transformation. Thanks.
This is meant to be TED-like, so I'll try and be TED-like, and I'll try and stick to 7 minutes. So imagine the scene in the Guardian newspaper in late 2009. We had together a... there you go. There you go. Next. Okay, there we go. We had together a dangerous mix of wranglers, data wranglers, hackers, journalists, and activists. Tim Berners-Lee, myself, and Andrew Stott, who'd been assigned to us by the Prime Minister. We'd been told to transform public access to government data. But how were we going to convince the data huggers, the rest of the politicians? So we imagined the postcode paper. This was a physically printed copy of all the useful data that the government held about our own very local areas. And in the UK, that's called the postcode. It's about 8 or 14 addresses. Information about where the nearest bus stops are, when they run, the crime rates, types of crime on your street, the things the council had fixed, the potholes, the broken street lights, when the garbage was collected. You know the stuff. Who to contact if it wasn't, the local allotments, where the land that people could use to grow produce was, the hospitals and doctors, opening hours, and on and on. So that paper was our pulling together of a set of data we knew existed that we could bring together. If we infringed copyright, broke the rules not to reproduce, not to reuse, didn't attempt to sell it, and didn't attempt to release it at all. Okay? Right down to the postcode itself, which